My name is Debbie. I'm 38 years old. The expensive pen felt cold in my hand, so different from the wedding band I was still wearing. Across the table, my husband, Mark, wasn't even trying to hide his smirk. It was a cruel, triumphant look I'd gotten used to over the last few years. This whole room, with its stuffy leather books and dead silence, was supposed to be his big finale. The last act of a play where he was the hero and I was the tragic wife he was getting rid of. He really thought this was it. He thought he had won. He chuckled, this low rumbling sound that just oozed condescension. Leaning over to his lawyer, a guy in a suit just as slick as his, he whispered something that made them both laugh. I didn't have to hear the words. I could feel them. They were laughing at me, the quiet homemaker he was so easily casting aside. He thought he was on a victory lap, watching me sign away my entire life. But what Mark didn't know, what he couldn't even begin to imagine, was that his own lawyer was about to wipe that smug grin right off his face. And it was all thanks to a secret I had been carefully guarding for the last 18 months. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple. We had the huge house in the suburbs, two luxury cars, and the exotic vacations that we plastered all over social media. We met in college. He was the ambitious business major who could charm anyone, and I was the art history student who loved untold stories. For a while, it was a fairy tale. He told me my quiet nature was a mystery he wanted to spend his life solving. For about a decade, I actually thought he meant it. I supported his career, hosted his client dinners, and managed our home like a pro. I put my own dreams on the back burner, especially my idea of opening a small art consultancy. Mark called them my little hobbies. He'd literally pat me on the head when I'd show him a business plan. "That's cute, honey," he'd say. "But why stress yourself out? I've got us covered." It was a gilded cage, and for a long time, I didn't mind the view. I told myself he wasn't being dismissive, he was being protective, that his total control over our money was just him being dedicated. The first real crack showed up at our 10th anniversary dinner. I brought up my business idea again, mentioning a small commercial space that had just opened up. I had a nest egg from my family that he didn't really know about. Before I could even finish my sentence, he threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was that same cold, mocking one I'd hear later in the lawyer's office. "Sweetheart, please," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "You're an amazing wife. Let's not pretend you're some kind of entrepreneur. You wouldn't last a week. Stick to what you're good at." He either didn't see how much that hurt, or he just didn't care. That night, the gold paint on my cage started to peel, revealing the cold steel bars underneath. His comments got worse. More belittling, he started giving me an allowance from our joint account, which was funded 100% by his salary, and then grilled me about every purchase. He'd make huge financial decisions without me, like the time he remortgaged our house for a risky investment and only told me after the fact. "It's just numbers, Sarah," he'd say, like he was talking to a kid. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." He wasn't protecting me, he was shrinking me. The moment it all came crashing down wasn't some big, dramatic fight. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Mark was on another business trip. I was tidying up his home office, a room he usually discouraged me from entering, and I noticed his laptop was open. We'd always shared passwords, a habit from back when we actually trusted each other. A new email was on the screen, and the subject line caught my eye: Divorce Strategy, Patterson. My heart started pounding. Patterson was his lawyer with a hand that would not stop. Shaking, I clicked it open. It wasn't just one email. It was a chain stretching back for months. I wasn't just reading a plan. I was witnessing my own takedown. Mark and his lawyer had mapped out everything: how to frame me as financially incompetent, how to use my time as a homemaker against me to deny any real alimony. The words were a blur, but some phrases burned into my brain. She has no idea what our assets are really worth. And the line from Mark that broke me: she'll be lucky to get the house, and she won't even be able to afford the taxes on it. She'll come crawling back in 6 months. This is for the best, a clean break for me. Attached was the divorce petition. The settlement offer was an insult. He was going to give me the house, but with a lien on it that would force me to sell. He'd offer a tiny one-time payment and act like it was some grand gesture of generosity. He was engineering my ruin. The man I loved, the life I'd built, it was all a lie. I just sank to the floor. The grief was so heavy, I couldn't breathe. I stayed there for what felt like hours. And then something shifted. The sorrow started to curdle and harden into a cold, quiet rage. He thought I was a fool. He thought I was weak, and he made the classic mistake of every arrogant man in history. He underestimated the woman he wronged. That night, I didn't cry. I planned. I went to the basement and dug out a dusty box labeled Sarah's Hobbies. Inside were my old business plans. He had laughed at them, but they were solid. The art world had changed, moving online. My old idea was outdated, but a new one took its place: a tech platform using blockchain to authenticate and trade digital art. It was ambitious, complex, and something he would never, ever believe I was capable of. First, I secured my money. That nest egg he'd dismissed as my shopping fund was bigger than he knew. I moved it to a new bank, my name only. I got a burner phone and rented a small anonymous office in the city, paying for a year upfront in cash. That was my new headquarters. For the next 18 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was the perfect, devoted wife. I was more agreeable than ever. I stopped questioning his trips. He just nodded when he talked down to me. My silence made him more arrogant, more careless. He thought it was surrender. It wasn't. It was strategy. My nights were spent in that tiny office. I learned everything I could about blockchain and digital assets. I took online courses in coding and finance. I hired a small team of freelance developers and a brilliant young art historian who got my vision. We built the platform from scratch. I called it Provenance, a name that meant history, truth, and authenticity. Everything my marriage was missing. Next, I found a lawyer. I didn't want a shark. I wanted a surgeon. I found Elizabeth through a women's business group I'd secretly joined. She was in her 50s with eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for dismantling men like Mark. In our first meeting, I laid it all out: the emails, Mark's plan, and my secret company. I didn't cry. I presented it like a case study. When I finished, she leaned back. "He thinks you're a porcelain doll," she said, with a little smirk. "He has no idea you're made of steel. We're not just going to respond to his petition, Sarah. We're going to let him build his own gallows." Her plan was genius. We'd let Mark file first. We'd let him make his insulting offer. We'd act weak. All the while, Provenance was growing. We secured seed funding. We onboarded our first major artist. We were making real money. And since I started the business during the marriage, it was technically marital property. Hiding it would be illegal. But revealing it at the perfect strategic moment, that was just good lawyering. Elizabeth prepared the financial disclosures, a time bomb just waiting to go off. For 6 months, I played the part, nodding along in meetings as Mark and his lawyer laid out their generous terms. The arrogance was suffocating. He was so sure he had won. He had no idea a tidal wave was about to hit him. And if you want to know exactly how it felt to watch his world come crashing down, stick around, because the impact was more satisfying than I ever could have dreamed. We were back in that conference room for the final signing. The air was thick with smug satisfaction. Mark practically slid the papers across the table at me. Here you go, Sarah. Sign on the dotted line, and we can all move on. His lawyer, Patterson, gave me a pitying look. The terms are very generous, Mrs. Evans, all things considered. My lawyer, Elizabeth, gave me a tiny, almost invisible nod. It was time. I picked up the pen. I could feel Mark's eyes on me, just savoring my humiliation. As I brought the pen to the paper, he let out that laugh, that cruel little chuckle. Don't break a nail, sweetheart, he said to his lawyer. I didn't even blink. I signed my name slow and steady. I pushed the papers back. Done, I said. Mark beamed. Excellent. Well, I think that concludes. Not quite, Elizabeth cut in, her voice like ice. Patterson frowned. Elizabeth, we agreed on these terms. This is highly irregular. What's irregular? Elizabeth said, staring him down. Is a settlement based on incomplete financial disclosures. We filed a revised statement of assets this morning. I trust you got the courier packet. Patterson's eyes flicked to an unopened envelope on his desk. Mark scoffed. Revised statement? What, did you find a few bucks in the cookie jar, Sarah? Patterson, looking uneasy, opened the packet. As he read the first page, the color drained from his face. He looked at Mark, then at the papers, then at me. Mark, he said, his voice a choked whisper, we have a problem. What problem? Mark shot back, his smile finally cracking. Patterson swallowed hard. Mark, your wife is the founder and majority shareholder of a company called Provenance LLC. He paused, looking at the next page. According to this independent valuation, the company is conservatively valued at $8 million. The room went completely silent. Mark just stared, his mouth hanging open. He looked from his lawyer to me, his brain refusing to compute. Then he burst out laughing, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. 8 million? Are you kidding me? Her? She can barely balance a checkbook. This is a joke. It's not a joke, Mark, Patterson said, his voice grim. He slid the documents across the table. It's all verified. The company was founded 18 months ago, and since it was started during the marriage, it's marital property. Mark's laughter died in his throat. He stared at the papers, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, then denial, then just pure horror. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years. The porcelain doll was gone. So, Elizabeth said, her voice calm and sharp, as you can see, your client's offer is no longer relevant. We are, of course, prepared to divide all marital assets, including the full value of provenance. This changes everything. The alimony you refused, the asset division you dictated, we're starting over from scratch. Mark's face was sheet white. He looked at his lawyer, desperate. Can she do this? Patterson just nodded. She just did. The room just exploded. Mark's cool demeanor shattered, and he started sputtering, accusing me of lying, cheating, deceiving him. It was ugly and pathetic. His lawyer literally had to hold him back from lunging across the table. Elizabeth just sat there, perfectly calm, and waited for his tantrum to burn itself out. Patterson knew the game was over. He told Mark in no uncertain terms that fighting this would be financial suicide. A judge would not be happy about his earlier attempt to hide assets, and my full disclosure made me look like the reasonable one. He was trapped. This settlement he'd laughed about was a fantasy. He wouldn't be leaving me with scraps. Now he'd be lucky to walk away with a fraction of the wealth he thought he controlled. He ended up having to buy me out of his own stocks just to balance the scales and agree to substantial alimony. He lost completely. That was 6 months ago. I'm writing this from my office overlooking the city. Provenance just closed a new round of funding, and we're expanding into Europe. The house is mine, free and clear. I sold it, though. Too many ghosts. I bought a beautiful apartment in the city. closer to my work and my new life. I hear about Mark sometimes. Friends of friends say he had to sell his sports car and is living in a much smaller apartment. He's bitter and tells anyone who will listen that his ex wife tricked him. But he's wrong. I didn't trick him. I just let him believe his own hype. His arrogance was the weapon. I just let him aim it at himself. This was never about revenge. It was about respect. It was about taking back the person he tried to erase. He laughed when I picked up that pen because he thought I was nothing without him. What he never understood was that the moment he dismissed me was the moment he set me free. He thought he was closing a chapter, but really he was just clearing the way for me to write a whole new book. And this time, I'm the only author. So many of us have been underestimated. Have you ever had a moment where you had to prove someone wrong, not with loud words, but with quiet action? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to hear more stories about turning the tables and finding your power, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You never know when you might need the inspiration.